They say the American supply chain runs on 18 wheels, diesel and pure grit. But behind the rumble of every truck on the highway, behind every load strapped down under the sun or hauled through the dead of night, there's a hidden enemy tightening its grip on an industry already pushed to the edge. Truckers call it freight fraud. Brokers call it a misunderstanding. Scammers call it easy money. And today, it's grown into a billion-dollar epidemic that threatens not only the livelihoods of drivers, but the stability of the entire supply chain. This is the story the big companies don't want to talk about. The story most Americans never hear. And the story thousands of truck drivers are living through right now, as fraudsters turn the backbone of American commerce into their personal casino. Freight fraud isn't new. But something changed after 2020. As inflation surged, fuel prices spiked, freight rates crashed, and more small trucking companies went bankrupt. An entire parallel economy of criminals, fake brokers, and identity thieves emerged, exploiting a system built on trust and a desperate need for loads. It's quiet, it's digital, and it's devastating. To understand how deep this rabbit hole goes, we need to start with the most common scheme: double brokering. In the simplest terms, double brokering happens when a fraudulent broker books a load from a shipper, then pretends to be a legitimate carrier and reassigns the load to a real trucker. The scammer collects the money from the original shipper, the carrier does the work and gets nothing, and the broker disappears into thin air. Truckers lose thousands of dollars. Shippers lose track of their cargo. Insurance companies refuse to pay. And in many cases, the stolen money funds even more elaborate scams. The industry has known about double brokering for decades, but in 2024 and 2025, it exploded. The FBI reported a dramatic rise in organized freight fraud rings, some operating across multiple states, some run from overseas call centers, and some hiding behind polished, legitimate-looking websites. What was once a rare annoyance became daily reality. Drivers who had hauled safely for years suddenly found themselves unpaid, unprotected, and unable to recover the money they were owed. A typical story goes something like this. A driver in Texas picks up a load of electronics worth $300,000, fully believing they were dispatched by a legitimate broker. The paperwork checks out. The phone number is real. The MC number belongs to a reputable company. The trucker delivers the load to a warehouse in California. They submit the invoice. Days pass, weeks, no response. The broker refuses payment. Eventually, the truth emerges. Someone stole the broker's identity and assigned that load illegally. And under the law, the driver has no recourse. They worked for free. This happens thousands of times a month. But double brokering is just the beginning. A more sophisticated form of fraud has been growing beneath the surface: load spoofing. In this scheme, scammers post fake loads on legitimate freight boards, pretending to represent massive companies like Amazon, Costco, or Tyson Foods. They lure truckers with high rates, force them to share sensitive paperwork, then disappear. Some steal driver identities. Some use the documents to impersonate real carriers. Others simply harvest personal data and sell it in dark web forums dedicated to trucking fraud. One click on a load board, one innocent phone call, and a trucker's entire business can crumble. To understand how widespread this has become, investigators have traced dozens of fraud networks operating out of Georgia, Florida, Texas, and California. Some are groups of former dispatchers. Some are organized criminal groups using fake shell corporations. And some are completely offshore, using VoIP numbers and AI-generated paperwork to hide their tracks. But the biggest question remains, why is this happening now? The answer lies in the economics of modern trucking. After the pandemic freight boom of 2021 cooled off, thousands of new small carriers entered the market chasing easy profits. They bought trucks at inflated prices, signed high-interest loans, and believed the surge would last forever. But by 2023, the freight market collapsed. Spot rates tanked. Diesel skyrocketed. insurance premiums doubled. And for many truckers, each mile they drove lost money. Desperation created opportunity. Fraudsters understood that when people get desperate, they stop asking questions. A dispatcher trying to keep the lights on won't double-check a phone number. A driver weeks behind on payments won't scrutinize a rate confirmation. And a small carrier fighting to survive won't always see the warning signs, because they simply can't afford to lose a load. Some of the biggest load boards in the country knew fraud was rising. They issued warnings, held webinars, but the scams evolved faster than the solutions. Fake MC numbers, forged insurance certificates, stolen safety ratings. Brokers and carriers impersonated each other with ease. Everything looked legitimate on the surface until payday. Behind the scenes, investigators uncovered another dark layer: factoring fraud. Most truckers use factoring companies to get paid early. Scammers discovered that by hijacking emails, spoofing carrier domains, or intercepting rate confirmations, they could reroute payments to their own bank accounts. The trucker still moves the load. The shipper still pays. But the money goes to a scammer who disappears before anyone notices. The FBI calls this business email compromise. Truckers call it financial murder. The human toll is enormous. Drivers who were already barely surviving found themselves suddenly devastated. A husband and wife team in Oklahoma lost $18,000 in a single month. A small fleet in Arizona shut down after 23 consecutive unpaid loads. One independent owner-operator in Georgia told investigators he considered abandoning the industry entirely after scammers drained his entire operating budget. For every big company that shrugs its shoulders and writes fraud off as a cost of doing business, there's a trucker who loses everything. But the criminal side of freight fraud is only part of the problem. There is a darker truth that many drivers whisper but few companies admit. Some freight brokers willingly play along. They post unrealistic rates, manipulate paperwork, or blame carriers for fraud they failed to prevent. In some cases, brokers knowingly hire bottom-barrel dispatchers or unverified carriers just to keep their margins high. When fraud happens, they deny responsibility. When truckers complain, they get blacklisted. It is a perfect system for everyone except the people actually hauling America's goods. As the scams grew more advanced, so did the tactics used to commit them. Criminals now use artificial intelligence-generated voices to impersonate dispatchers. They use deep-fake signatures to forge documents. Some even track truck movements using publicly available location data, allowing them to time their scams right as a driver empties their trailer. The technology is not the problem. The industry's vulnerabilities are. Trucking today runs on outdated regulations, fragmented communication, and enormous blind spots. Shippers rarely verify who is hauling their freight. Brokers rarely verify who they are giving loads to. Carriers rarely verify the authenticity of the people assigning them loads. Everyone trusts everyone else's paperwork, and that trust has become the scammer's greatest weapon. The impact spills far beyond truckers. Retailers lose millions from stolen cargo. Insurance companies raise premiums on every carrier, even the innocent ones. Consumers pay more for groceries, electronics, and supplies. And the entire supply chain, already strained by inflation and economic instability, becomes even more fragile. Some lawmakers are pushing for reform. There are calls for stricter licensing, centralized verification systems, and major penalties for fraudulent double brokering. But the wheels of regulation move slowly. Meanwhile, scammers operate at lightning speed. In the absence of real protection, truckers have turned to each other. Online forums, Facebook groups, WhatsApp networks, word-of-mouth lists. They track suspicious brokers, warn each other about fake load postings, and expose scam companies long before official agencies do. Truckers have become their own watchdogs because the systems meant to protect them simply don't. Some of the stories shared in these groups are heartbreaking. A single mother in the Midwest who spent her last dollars on diesel for a load that would never be paid. A new immigrant driver who was lured into a fake carrier startup and left stranded in a warehouse parking lot with no fuel, no money, and no help. A small fleet owner who discovered that a scammer used his MC number to move stolen cargo, triggering an investigation that nearly shut down his business for good. Freight fraud isn't a minor inconvenience. It's a quiet catastrophe. Perhaps the most frightening part is that many scammers never face consequences. The industry is fragmented across 50 states with no central enforcement agency. The FBI investigates major thefts, but most fraud cases involve sums too small to trigger federal involvement. Local police departments have no jurisdiction across state lines. Brokers blame carriers. Carriers blame brokers. Everyone shrugs. Scammers win. Victims do not. To understand the scale, consider this. According to national claims data and shipping insurance reports, freight fraud losses exceeded $1 billion annually by 2025. Those losses are larger than many natural disasters, larger than some state budgets, and larger than the net profits of several major trucking companies combined. The true number is likely much higher because most truckers never file a report. They chalk it up to bad luck. They move on. They shoulder the loss. Still, the losses keep stacking higher. Drivers who once dreamed of owning their own truck now struggle just to break even. Drivers who took pride in delivering freight on time now battle mistrust at every turn. Dispatchers who worked loyally for years now second-guess every phone call, every offer, every rate confirmation. And the industry as a whole becomes weaker. If freight fraud continues unchecked, experts warn that more trucking companies will collapse, more drivers will quit, and more freight will be controlled by only a handful of mega carriers that can absorb the losses. Small business trucking, the backbone of America's transportation network, could disappear entirely. But there is a path forward. New verification tools are emerging. Some use blockchain to track document authenticity. Others use live authentication to confirm that both brokers and carriers are real. Industry groups are pushing for standardized paperwork, centralized reporting systems, and criminal penalties for double brokering. Most importantly, truckers are demanding transparency, the one thing scammers fear most. Freight fraud thrives in the shadows. It thrives when drivers are isolated, desperate, and uninformed. But when the industry unites, when shippers verify their carriers, when brokers verify their partners, and when truckers verify every load with the vigilance of someone guarding their livelihood, fraud becomes harder, slower, and riskier. United action raises the risk for scammers and lowers the risk for drivers. The road ahead is long. Truckers have always lived on long roads. They know how to endure difficult miles, and they know how to look out for one another. America depends on them. Every meal, every package, every tool, on every shelf. For too long, the system they support has left them exposed to criminals operating behind screens, fake websites, and counterfeit documents. The backbone of the supply chain cannot be taken for granted. A billion-dollar crisis does not fix itself. It requires awareness. It requires pressure. And it requires the voices of the very people freight fraud is trying to silence. The next time you see a semi-truck roaring down the highway, remember this. That driver is navigating more than traffic. They are navigating an industry under siege. Every mile they drive is a reminder that the backbone of America deserves better: protection, transparency, and a system that values their sacrifice as much as the cargo they haul. Freight fraud may be a billion-dollar scam, but the people behind the wheel are worth far more. They are the quiet defenders of the American economy. They are the reason goods move. They are the reason shelves stay full. Until the system changes, they are also the reason this story needs to be told, loudly, clearly, and without fear. Because the truth is simple. The scammers may think they have found a loophole in trucking. America cannot afford a supply chain built on lies. The drivers who move this nation will not survive in a system designed to exploit them. It is time to expose the fraud. It is time to protect the drivers. And it is time for the industry to stop pretending that everything is fine, when the people who keep it running are being robbed in broad daylight. Freight fraud is real, it's growing, and it's crushing truckers across the country. But exposing it is the first step towards stopping it. And now that you know the truth, the only question left is how long the industry will tolerate the scam before drivers, companies, and lawmakers finally unite to shut it down for good.